Welcome to W.W. Williams Personal Protective Equipment Training. In this training, we're going to go over the various different types of personal protective equipment that you may encounter during your operation while employed here. First thing we need to understand is what OSHA requires us to do. Most importantly, they want us to assess for the possible hazards and present hazards that exist. For that, we document everything in a job hazard assessment, which we'll review at a later time during this training. We then select and provide the appropriate PPE based on the hazards that we've observed and the assessments that have been signed off by management. Finally, we get to train you guys on how to properly use and recognize the PPE. So our program overviews the following topics: when PPE is necessary, what a hazard assessment is and when it's required to be completed, how to properly don, doff, adjust, and wear your PPE, the limitations of the equipment, the proper care, maintenance, useful life, and replacement and disposal of said PPE. For the most part, PPE is not anything that you can repair, so we rely on replacement. But it's important to figure out when a PPE needs to be replaced. For example, when do you replace gloves? When do you replace safety glasses? And how often should you change your earplugs? One of the most important things is to establish responsibilities within the plant. For example, management, they're the ones who set the replacement policy. How often they purchase PPE, what kind of PPE is purchased, and most importantly, they enforce its proper use. So you will notice that in most of our shops, everyone wears safety glasses, from the VP down to the shop floor employee. So it is important that management enforce its proper use. Employees, on the other hand, need to follow the policy. You need to understand that when we selected the PPE for you guys to wear at work, it's because we've determined that there's hazards that are present. Whether or not you see these hazards or they're entirely evident, they exist, and thus we need to protect you. However, ask if you think additional PPE is required. There may be a task that is so seldom done that we might have overlooked it. And most importantly, replace it if you think it's no longer valuable, no longer viable, no longer useful, torn, damaged. However, that doesn't mean that you get to just throw it around. So you need to make sure that it's properly stored and cared for, that you maintain it in a clean and orderly fashion. Even though safety glasses offer a huge level of protection for your face and eyes, that doesn't mean that you get to throw them about. So make sure that you put them in a safe location where they will be free from scratches or any other impact damage. But one of the most important things to consider is before we issue out safety glasses or gloves, if at all possible, we need to control hazards so that we can minimize the hazards that you are exposed to instead of just giving you PPE. And so thus we follow something that's called a hierarchy of control, which in possible, we start off eliminating hazards. Those of you who have worked for a long time at W.W. Williams may remember that for example, our parts cleaner or brake cleaner has changed. We switched to a safer compound, one that did not contain a chlorinated compound, which could be harmful to health. Engineering controls can be something like machine guards, something that's going to prevent you from actually accessing the point of operation or the hazardous point. Machine guards are key in maintaining safety for the employees. Another thing, for example, is the dyno. We have them in separate buildings or blocked off so that noise doesn't wander throughout the entire facility. Administrative controls are a way that we limit how many employees are exposed to the hazard. So similarly, your parts department will not be exposed to the same hazards that the shop employees do. Then finally, we rely on PPE. Mostly because PPE is employee dependent. So you can have someone that is using it incorrectly, not using it, ignores to use it, or simply doesn't see the value of it. So at that point, there's no level of protection. So just in summary, engineering controls are the preferred method because they're permanent, we're not employee dependent. Another example is using the wet method when performing brake jobs to minimize exposure to dust. Administrative controls rely on cross-training, that we all know how to do various jobs so that only certain employees are exposed to the hazards. The hazard assessment is a document that we use to determine what kind of chemical exposures, any falling hazards that can fall on our heads, our feet, our hands, any impact or penetration hazards, any airborne particulates, temperature, extremely hot, extremely cold, things that can burn us, any radiation that can happen either from non-ionizing, welding, UV, anything that is moving that can potentially harm us, come in contact with our hands, any sharp objects, and any projectiles. We take a look at all these potential hazards, and then we assemble them in something that's called a job hazard assessment. Let's have you guys do a quick hazard assessment. For example, impact. What is the impact hazard? Well, obviously there could be the impact from this nice hammer that can strike down this rod, but he can also miss and hit this nice man's hands or head. There's a fall hazard where he can fall from this bucket. There's also a hazard where he can miss everything off completely and hit himself. So in this, we would obviously select a different type of method for working, eliminating this nice gentleman holding the rod, and implement a different type of tooling. If possible, we would also include a hard hat. What about this? This is something you guys may do. Some grinding. So take a look at his face. There's no face shield. So any sparks can burn his face. His clothing is cotton, so he should have some type of protective clothing. He's wearing gloves. I'm wondering if it's the right type of gloves. It shouldn't be cotton, it should be leather. And then take a look at his really nice, comfortable, fancy shoes. Probably want sturdy work shoes, so that if this piece falls on him, he's protected. There's also chemicals nearby that probably should be put away, so that if one of these sparks come, they're not ignited. At the same time, look at where this cart is at. These sparks can accidentally ignite a fire or possible explosion to the oxyacetylene. So when we take a look at PPE, there's a huge amount of things that we need to consider. For example, what kind of eye and face protection is made available? Well, we look at safety glasses, face shields, and goggles. As far as respiratory protection, we look at what's called a particulate filtering face piece, something like a white dust mask, also referred as an N95. For foot protection, we have two different options, non-slip soles and steel toes. So if you're working out in the shop and there's a possibility where you can drop a piece of tooling, transmission, parts of an engine onto your foot, you should be wearing steel toes. As far as hand protection, we have chemical protection. So your gloves that are either made out of nitrile, butyl, neoprene. We also have leather gloves. That's for welding, changing out propane tanks. We have cloth. Those are for moving boxes. So your parts room guys would have that. Mechanics, we have the mechanic gloves, which allow you protection from scrapes, superficial cuts, but they're not for any chemical or hardcore machine use, such as welding or grinding. For hearing protection in the dyno room, we have earplugs, and sometimes we have earmuffs as well. Any employees that are working above 4 feet in height are also provided with fall protection, such as body harnesses. We also have anchor equipment and a lanyard. For all our techs that are working on electrical systems, we have arc flash protection. However, that's a different training, and thus refer to the arc flash training that W.W. Williams provides for you for more information. For welding protection, or anytime you're using the oxyacetylene torch, make sure you're using gloves, leather or frame retardant torso protection. It can either be an apron or a jacket. Make sure you're using a welder's helmet, welder's mask for eye protection, so that even a little bit of a flash can create a corneal abrasion or corneal burn, which is going to be very painful. And for chemical protection, we have very little chemicals, but we do have parts washers, brake cleaners, and so thus you have to make sure that you're using a nitrile glove or neoprene glove, face shield, and safety glasses whenever you're spraying the chemicals. Your responsibility is to make sure that this PPE is in good condition. So make sure you inspect it. There's no breaks, tears. Most importantly, we need to make sure that your PPE is fitting properly. So if you have extremely large hands and you're wearing a small glove, they're probably not going to be very comfortable. So make sure you talk to your manager or supervisor so he or she can get you the right PPE for the right size and the right use. Also, dispose of and replace any damaged PPE. Like I've said earlier, we can't replace or we can't repair any damaged safety glasses or gloves. We certainly can't tape them. So make sure you dispose of them. If possible, return them back to your supervisor so that he or she can see that they're damaged, and then throw them away. Report any misuse or abuse of PPE. Obviously, that affects everyone. So if you see a coworker that is abusing the policy, let's talk about it. Make sure that we get that corrected. And properly store your PPE. Safety glasses should be put away in the drawer or your toolbox so they don't get scratched or broken. The other thing, gloves. Make sure that they're not in a way where they can be torn, damaged, run over by forklifts or vehicles. And safety equipment such as face shields should be hung up so they don't scratch. Earplugs can be replaced at each shift as long as they are clean. So let's go over some eye safety. As you can see here, safety glasses can be the difference between you going home and being able to watch TV and having an eye patch. Every year, probably about every 4 minutes, there's someone that has an eye injury. Not always necessarily related to work. Depends on your hobbies. If you're a hunter, you can certainly be exposed to eye hazards that way. If you like to ride motorcycles, that's another way that your eyes can be impacted. If you are an amateur woodworker, or you have a wood shop at home or tooling at home, and you don't wear safety glasses, you could also be impacted by that as well. If you read carefully, every instruction manual starts off with what kind of PPE is needed for all the tools that you purchase. However, most of us don't really read that. But it does state that you should wear eye protection. So when we did the hazard assessment, we determined that there's flying particles that can come from using hand tools whenever you guys are repairing any type of machinery or equipment from buses and trucks and all the other vehicles or generators that you may work. So we selected safety glasses that are going to protect you from impact from your face and eyes. Anytime you're using a bench grinder, a welder, hand grinder, you should be using face shield with safety glasses underneath. Anytime you have exposure to chemical or splash hazards, make sure that you also wear safety glasses, or goggles with a face shield. And here's a nice little table to kind of let you guys know what kind of PPE related to face protection is assessed or determined based on the assessment. So, for example, any grinding and sawing, the hazards are flying particles, and so we should wear goggles or safety glasses with side shields, and use a face shield as well. One important thing to notice is your safety glasses should be made according to Z87.1. That's the standard that tells us that the safety glasses were manufactured made out of polycarbonate, which is an impact-resistant material. Hearing conservation is not a very common hazard that we have at WW. At WW Williams, we have very few noise hazards. However, things like the dyno or operating a high-speed tool can cause high-pitched noises that could cause long-term noise damage. So, it's required that we wear hearing protection above 90 decibels. That's your dyno room. However, you're doing any grinding or drilling or sanding that is very loud, you're possibly going above 85 decibels. At that point, it's recommended that you use hearing protection. A couple of facts. Hearing protection does improve communication. Essentially what it does is eliminate background noise. It does reduce the amount of general fatigue. Remember that noise is an environmental hazard, so our body absorbs the noise. The louder it is, the more fatigue you're going to get. Think of a crowded shopping mall right around Christmas time. You mostly get fatigue not so much from walking around holding bags, but from the amount of people and the noise that are around you. However, it's not efficient if you don't wear it, or you don't wear it properly. It's really not going to protect you. And it's overall a benefit. But it's not just from the workplace noise that you come in contact with. Also, you could have noises coming from hobbies. Hearing loud music. Again, if you're a hunter and you're shooting guns, anything that is extremely loud, that can also amount to your hearing loss. So you want to make sure that we have the proper fit. If you're wearing earplugs, they're usually made out of foam. So you want to make sure that we first roll them with clean hands, so you get a really nice small. Then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to open up your ear canal. As we got older, our ear canals kind of closed up and became angled, almost oval shaped. So you got to make sure that you reach around, pull your ear slightly so you can open up your ear canal, and then insert that earplug. Hold it in place, and you'll feel it expanding. You'll have a really nice snug fit. That protects any outstanding or outdoor noise from entering the ear canal, which can cause hearing loss. Then we move on to respiratory protection. Our respiratory system is equipped with various filters. For example, nose hairs and the mucus capture particles. Then we have the trachea and your bronchi. These are lined with special cells that produce a little bit of mucus, and they essentially move things in and out of the lungs to eliminate any contaminants. However, we want to help them out, and we want to make sure that we use dust masks whenever we have an overabundance of dust in the air. There's not a task at WW Williams that requires the use of dust masks, but they're available voluntarily for you. So we have an N95 particulate filtering face piece for any time you're doing grinding, welding, especially if you're doing any kinds of stainless steel welding, any brake jobs where dust can be exposed and you're not using the wet method, or any time that you're doing any cleaning and there could be a lot of dust. We don't really have any other chemicals that can be hazardous where a respirator is needed. A couple of things just to remember. The respirators have to be NIOSH approved. These are actual respirators, even though we just call them dust masks. These are NIOSH approved respirators. What NIOSH is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. No beards or facial hair is allowed. There's two straps. One goes above and one goes below the ear. Don't modify or remove straps. That's a common thing that we see. People will cut straps or they'll wear the two straps together. You have to make sure that they're separated. And these are not universal. So you can't take them home and paint because the paint contains a volatile organic compound which is not filtered by the mask that we have here. But they're very efficient. They protect about 10 times above the exposure level for dust. The exposure level for dust is 15 milligrams per cubic meter. So these are good for about 150 milligrams per cubic meter. However, if you're feeling dizzy or can't breathe, remove the respirator, leave the area immediately, and contact your supervisor. It's important to note that these respirators do not provide any type of oxygen. They merely filter the. Let's talk about hand protection. Most important thing is that not all gloves are considered equal. Some are for abrasion, some are for electrical, and even further, some are for chemical. The most important thing to notice is do not wear gloves nearing any moving parts. They can be caught and pull your hand further in. So we took a look at the hazards that exist to your hands. Everything from lacerations, impact, and penetration that can come to your hands. Also, chemical exposures. For the most part, we're going to be exposing ourselves to some mild solvents. They come in the brake cleaners, parts cleaners. We have some corrosives if we're using the water-based cleaners as well. So we also have heat hazards. Think about a hot engine that you may come in contact with. So we have the proper gloves. Any leather and cloth gloves provide protection for sharp or dangerous surfaces. Chemical gloves are either made out of butyl, nitrile, or neoprene. They protect against your aggressive chemicals, such as your parts cleaners. The mechanic style, that's the one most of the employees use, are designed for comfort and dexterity, and they protect for basic lacerations and scratches. We have what's called the permeation rate. Based on the chemicals we have, the gloves we use, nitrile and butyl, have a very high permeation rate. So they're good for about quite a high concentration of chemicals. So you don't necessarily need to change them every time. However, if they're dirty, torn, or damaged, go ahead and change them out. It's better to be safe than sorry. Anytime you're doing welding, you have to protect yourself against the non-ionizing radiation that comes. It can affect your skin and your eyes. It can also burn you. And there can also be electrical hazards if it's not properly insulated. So wear your welding helmet, clothing and torso protection, which are either made out of leather or fire retardant clothing. Make sure you wear your welding gloves, which are thick gauntlet style leather gloves, and a face shield. Anytime you're working above 4 feet, you should really be tied off. And that is the ABCs. The anchor point, which is always above you. The body harness, which is a 5-point full body harness, not just a waist strap. And a connection point, which is either a 3 to 6 foot shock absorbing lanyard or something that's called a retractable lifeline or a shock reducing lifeline. And here's a sample of your job hazard assessments that was created for W.W. Williams. If you want a copy of these, feel free to reach out to your supervisor, and we will get them and make them available. So hopefully by the end of this training you've learned what kind of PPE is necessary, what is necessary, and how you should inspect it, how to properly use it. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. The whole purpose is for us to eliminate the hazards. PPE reduces them. So if you become aware of a new hazard, please let us know. Thank you, and be safe.